So here we are, journey's end for the character of Wolverine and indeed Professor Charles Xavier in the current iteration of the X-Men universe until they reboot it, of course. All cynicism aside, it's difficult to not feel a little sentimental about the whole thing. Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart's portrayals of their characters have become truly iconic in the mythos of the X-Men cinematic universe since it began back in 2000. Along the way, the franchise has had its fair share of creative missteps, like X-Men 3, which I still kind of like, the awful first Wolverine film, and Apocalypse. The high points, Deadpool, X-Men 1, but X-Men 2 is really high-quality sci-fi fantasy in my view. The Wolverine is a visually and thematically unique departure, and Days of Future Past is easily the crowning achievement of the franchise. I was kind of indifferent to the prequels, like First Class, given my general disdain for prequels. The original trilogy cast will always be the true X-Men for me. So with all that said, we arrive at the endgame, the final hurrah for the franchise's most beloved and important character, James Logan Howlett, Wolverine. There is major spoilers for this movie ahead, so if you haven't seen it, look away now. Logan is exactly what I wanted this movie to be since I first saw the original Johnny Cash teaser trailer some months ago. Indeed, it's exactly what I've wanted comic book superheroes to become. Mature, a bit more realistic, serious, devoid of bombastic melodrama and camp, and focused on a smaller, more intimate, character-driven story, and not on a big, cliched, earth-shattering, world-ending, stereotypical superhero story. Director James Mangold decided to take some inspiration from classic movies like The Wrestler, Unforgiven, Shane, and some good old-fashioned westerns. As a consequence, Logan is a very uncompromising and uninhibited film, from the significant gore and increased amounts of violence and the frequent use of profanity, which actually just further adds to the realism and often the humor. It's gritty without being dark, brutal without being painful, sentimental without being melancholic, and profoundly meaningful without being preachy and self-righteous. So, a brief overview of the story. Set in 2029, Logan is a limousine driver, of all things, working near the US-Mexican border. He lives in an abandoned smelting plant in Mexico with Caliban, a mutant tracker, and a 90-year-old Professor Xavier who is suffering from something resembling Alzheimer's. The neurological problems he endures must be constantly medicated because his telepathic abilities now produce catastrophic effects to anyone around him if left unchecked. Mutants have been extinct, actually, for 25 years, due, in large part, and you find out later in the film, to a nefarious plot by a research facility called alkali transigen. Through the use of intravenous chemicals placed into the food and water supply, they've managed to eliminate mutant genes entirely in the human populace. Their intention is to breed and control their own mutants and raise them as weapons. Logan himself has aged significantly, and his adamantium alloy in his body is slowly poisoning him to death, causing him to no longer be able to regenerate fully. Throughout the film, he gradually becomes more sickly, out of breath, and fatigued. He's developed a drinking habit as a coping mechanism for his degeneration, but also as a means of dealing with the loss of everyone he's ever cared about. All his friends have died. Over the years, he's become world-weary, jaded, cynical, and insular, living on the margins of society and avoiding any meaningful human interactions beyond his relationship with Professor Xavier, his pseudo-father figure. This Logan is a broken and defeated man, whose best days are behind him, but nevertheless finds himself trying to justify his continued existence in a world that's tossed him aside onto the scrap heap of obsolescence. The parallels with Mickey Rourke's The Wrestler are striking. A once great champion, now completely defeated and kind of irrelevant. One day he's approached by a woman called Gabrielle. Now she's worked at Transigen. She requests his help in getting her 11-year-old, seemingly mute daughter Laura, to a place called Eden, a sanctuary in North Dakota. Now, long story short at this point, Transigen has been growing genetically enhanced mutant children as experiments for their X-23 and X-24 projects. One by one, the researchers have decided there to terminate the children once they were deemed no longer useful and uncontrollable. Gabrielle managed to get some of the children out of the facility, so she's not actually Laura's mother. Laura is, in fact, as you find out later, Logan's biological daughter. She has the same adamantium alloy mounted within her skeletal structure as he does, so she's got the claws and everything, but she's grown up in a laboratory as an experiment, so she's devoid of human social skills and never experienced anything approaching a proper childhood. When Transigen's enhanced security chief Donald Pierce and his men discover Logan's whereabouts in the hopes of finding Xavier and Laura, A merry chase begins. Logan, Xavier, and Laura are on the road, on the run for most of the film, with the aim of rendezvousing with the other escaped children at Eden, a place that Logan discovers may very well be fictional because it was mentioned in an X-Men comic book. Now, that's the basic plot. I'm not going to give you a detailed chronological breakdown blow by blow of the narrative leading up to the conclusion. I'm just going to focus on specific points in the story. The central theme of the story is one of family, and Logan's difficulty in integrating the very concept of family into his life. He's been a loner who's avoided meaningful human relationships his entire life. Besides, of course, Jean Grey, there's been few people of emotional importance to him. Now suddenly he finds himself a reluctant father with a daughter to care about, one final dangerous mission to undertake that he'd rather not, and a dying pseudo-father figure in Xavier to protect also. I will say that the relationship between Xavier and Logan is really the highlight of the film, in my view. It began, of course, back in X-Men 1 with Xavier taking Logan in under his wing. Of course, they mentioned that Logan was previously a cage fighter. Xavier became his mentor, and now the roles have changed. Logan feels a great sense of responsibility to the very sickly and geriatric professor, the last remaining link to his past and the only person left he truly cares about. The father-son dynamic is played up significantly in this film in a way that it never previously was in the franchise, and it's fantastic. The chemistry between Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart is superb, and the emotional bond between them is endearing and profound. The scenes in which they have a quiet moment together, either bickering or just reluctantly acknowledging how much they care for each other through all the bickering and all the bitterness, that's the heart and soul of this film. Throw in the tender moments where Logan must struggle to discover his paternal instincts for his daughter, and it's a heartwarming and tragic story that will make you smile as often as it may move you to perhaps break out the Kleenex. Now, I've seen other people also reach the same conclusion as I have. The relationship between the aged Xavier and Logan is not unlike that of Steptoe and Son, actually. My American subscribers may be unfamiliar with what I'm talking about. Now for the hurt. In a story about the good, bad, and ugly of life, death is inevitable, and if the final moments of Professor Xavier don't break your heart, I don't think it can be broken. Now, it was kind of telegraphed that Xavier would perish in this film because we saw that in the trailer, a burial scene. My issue with his death is kind of its execution in the story. He finally reaches a significant realization about his actions at Westchester. Apparently, he inadvertently killed quite a few people and mutants through another cataclysmic psychic episode. He expresses his remorse to Logan, or who he thinks is Logan, but then suddenly he is attacked and stabbed in the chest by a character who looks uncannily like Logan. When I first saw this, I thought, well, he's got different hair, he's wearing different clothes, and why would Logan do this? Obviously, this is a nightmare sequence, a dream sequence for Xavier. Nothing to worry about here. Then you realize it's real, and this is in fact a new character, a feral Wolverine clone sent by the bad guys, basically. And the shock of this alone, it kind of undermines Xavier's death, making it seem very left of field, rushed, and a little forced, because you spend several moments scratching your head going, what the hell is going on here? What just happened? Is that Wolverine? Is it a clone? And for a second I was even thinking maybe it's Mystique or something. Stewart does an incredible job in this film, playing a deeply troubled Xavier, inflicted with dementia, and yet still filled with a sense of purpose and a sufficient awareness of the world to try to keep Logan on the right path with his last breath. Laura takes to Xavier as a protective pseudo-grandfather, and her devastation and anger following his death is really well played by Daphne Keane. In the final climactic battle, I know I'm rushing ahead to the end here, but Logan's degeneration accelerates, and he takes a healing serum to enable him to kill most of the soldiers sent to round up the children, but it wears off very quickly, and he's left with very little left in the tank for the final fight with his clone. Suffice to say, the Transigen operatives are taken care of by a combination of Logan, Laura, and the mutant children, but Logan is mortally wounded in his fight with the X-24 clone. He collapses impaled on a tree stump, holding Laura's hand. She calls him Daddy for the first time, and he tells her not to become the violent weapon they wanted her to be. Logan's final epiphany is a callback to what Xavier had said earlier in the film to him about what it feels like to be part of a family. So this is what it feels like, is his final words. He dies holding Laura's hand, and the children bury him under some rocks. She recites the final line from the movie Shane, which she'd watched earlier with Charles in a casino hotel. There's no living with a killing. There's no going back from one. Right or wrong, it's a brand sticks. There's no going back. Now you run home to your mother and tell her everything's all right and there aren't any more guns in the valley. They then depart for what is presumably Canada. As she leaves, she moves the wooden cross left at his graveside to form an X. If I'm honest, I'm a little torn on this ending. I have no problem in principle with the idea of Logan dying, but this seems somewhat dissatisfying to me for an important reason. If the story had not been about his reconciliation with an estranged daughter, I would have been okay with him dying, but given Laura's tortured upbringing, it seems cruel to both characters. She loses her only family after only just connecting with her father for the first time, and also loses her one and only shot at something resembling a normal parental relationship. And he loses his daughter, an only family that he's ever had, knowing she'll be alone without him in the future. It's actually a huge smack in the face to both characters when you think about it, and it's less than an ideal conclusion to this iconic character. But I will say this, it's certainly a realistic ending. Life is not in the habit of doling out ideal send-offs, and Wolverine's life has been tragic, if nothing else. So, live by the sword, die by the sword, I guess, so maybe it's appropriate in that sense. Life is harsh and cruel and unforgiving, and you have to make the most of the good moments you receive along the way because there's plenty of pain, and you never have to look too far to find pain. Just like the film itself, there's sentimental moments to savor and pain and heartbreak to endure. Maybe I'm a little bit too sentimental. I'm a sentimental fool and a sucker for a happy ending here, but I won't hold the ending against what is a very brilliant and worthwhile film, and easily the most mature and meaningful entry in the X-Men franchise. Perhaps the very best of all, arguably the best film in the franchise. I give Logan 8.5 out of 10. How about you?